of state and federal taxpayer dollars. Most of our budget comes from two state sources, the Minnesota General Fund and the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, which are both approved by the Minnesota legislature. The Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund is a part of the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, which Minnesota voters passed in 2008. It created a small increase to the sales tax, and that increase is dedicated to 4 different areas. The first is outdoor heritage. The second is clean water. The third is parks and trails. And of course, lastly, the arts and cultural heritage. And actually today, more than 80% of the Arts Board's budget does come from that dedicated revenue from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. And these funds are guaranteed through 2034 unless it's extended by legislative action. I also want to mention that we receive a small portion of our budget from an annual federal grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, which helps supplement our state support. Okay, so, throughout today's webinar, I'm going to kind of stress how we work to serve the entire state. And one of the ways we do that is through partnership with Minnesota's regional arts councils. If you're not familiar with the regional arts councils, there are 11 arts councils, and they're actually nonprofit organizations that were designated by the Minnesota legislature to help support the arts at a local level. These councils were created, like I said, to support local arts development and really to help ensure that public funding and services for the arts reach every county in the state. The Arts Board grants funds to each council, which then they use to support their specific needs and programs. And I want to clarify, just in case there's any confusion, that regional arts councils are not a satellite office of the Arts Council or the Arts Board, I should say. They're separate entities, they have their own boards, but I think it's helpful to understand that connection when we're talking about how funds are dispersed throughout the state. If you're not familiar with your regional arts councils, I think that's a really great resource. And so we're going to drop a link in the chat. And I see Gabby has done that already. So yeah, you can learn more there. We'll also have all of this information on the resource page for the webinar. So I know that was a lot of big picture information that I covered really, really quickly. If you have any questions about that, there will be plenty of time at the end to answer questions. So, jot them down, keep them in your back pocket. But for now, we're going to dive into the grant review process. So I'm going to cover a few different things. I'm going to talk about our grant programs, and then I'm going to take a deep dive into the work that advisors do and how you can get involved and why it's so important. All right, let's kick off. Let's get started. So each year we offer a variety of different grant programs to artists, arts organizations, schools, and communities. Each of these programs focuses on a different aspect of the arts ecosystem, and I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of this year's programs. They include the Operating Support Program. This provides general support for high-quality established arts organizations. We also have Arts Education, which supports arts learning opportunities for Minnesotans of all ages and abilities. We have the Accessible Arts Program, which helps the arts sector expand access for people with disabilities. We have the Creative Individuals Program, and that program supports individual artists and culture bearers to sustain their creative work while also engaging with their communities in a meaningful way. We have the Arts Experiences Program, which funds both individuals and organizations that are offering meaningful arts experiences in their communities. And lastly, we have Cultural Expression, which supports activities that explore, preserve, celebrate, or sustain a culture through an art practice. So, as you've heard, we have a pretty broad range of grant programs. They each have their own guidelines. They each have their own deadlines and criteria. I just want to mention that if you are interested in applying for a grant in the future, we totally welcome you to do so. Deadlines for this year's programs have passed, but we announce our programming at the beginning of each year. So I encourage you to keep an eye on our webpage, the Arts Board website. We also have a newsletter, I should mention. So we'll send out e-blasts about when grant opportunities are opening, how you can apply, all of that good stuff. And you can apply, or I should say subscribe to that newsletter on our website. So now we're going to talk about the panel review process. Once applications are submitted, they go into a panel review. We get so many applications, which is awesome. That's a really great opportunity that we have to work throughout the state. But that means that we rely on the help of hundreds of Minnesotans to volunteer their time to serve as grant program advisors. Those advisors, they play a really important role in guiding our funding decisions. They review artistic work, or they evaluate grant applications by reading and scoring them based on an established criteria. These scores help determine which proposals are then actually recommended to our board for funding. So our grant advisors are the ones who make the recommendation to the board. And I think that's a really cool opportunity to shape public funding in Minnesota. So this is where you all come in, right? We encourage any Minnesotan, as long as they're 18 or older, to apply. I want to stress that you don't need professional experience in the arts or have a background in the arts to serve. It's just really important that you have a strong interest in the arts in your community and that you have experience with some kind of nonprofit organization or community work. So that could mean several different things, right? You could be an artist, like we mentioned, or an administrator. You could work as a volunteer in your community, or maybe you've served on boards or committees for nonprofits in your committee or communities. It's really important that we have a broad range of professional experience because everybody brings something different to the table, and our applications that advisors review are so varied. My job is to work directly with advisors to help match you to the right grant program that aligns with your interests or your experience. So, for example, if you are somebody who, is an educator or has worked in the education field, maybe arts education is the right fit for you. Or if you have experience with accessibility work, accessible arts would be a great program for you. Another thing that we work to do is to build panel teams that are reflective of the diversity of our state. So we want to make sure that culturally, geographically, we have well-balanced teams. And the reason for that is, for example, someone living in greater Minnesota, like many of you, you might be able to bring a certain context to an application from a greater Minnesota region that others might just not have. So it's really important that we have different backgrounds, different lived experiences represented on our panels so that each application is getting a fair and balanced review. So then moving on, once you've been assigned to a program, you've committed to serving as a grant advisor. This is where the real work starts, right? Where the fun stuff happens. So you're going to begin with a live virtual training that is led by a program officer. And this training covers how to read applications, how to score application, tips for reading and note taking, and then just really anything you might need to know to feel confident in your role. Even if you have never reviewed a grant application in your life before, our process really is designed to help and support you through every step of the way. We want to make it as accessible as possible for you. Now, that said, most of our programs, our grant advisors receive a $300 stipend for their work. And just a really quick rundown of kind of what those responsibilities are. You will serve a 3 to 4 week term So during this review period, you will participate in a 1 hour live virtual training with a program officer. You will independently review and score no more than 25 grant applications. 25 is plenty. And at the end of your review period, you're going to participate in a full day virtual public panel meeting with your review team. And each year we kind of send out a survey to our panelists or our advisors, and we ask them, how much time have you served? What was the work like? And most advisors spend about 30 hours total on the process. So it's a pretty significant time commitment over the 3 to 4 week review period. I want to call out the operating support program specifically as we're talking about panel responsibilities and things like that. Because operating support applications are a little bit more detailed, we require more information from our applicants. Therefore, the commitment is larger and the stipend is $500. For advisors in the operating support program, you will actually serve a 4 month period. So this goes from February through May. You will complete a virtual live training with the program officer, just like the other program. You will review and score about 17 to 20 applications. You'll also serve as a primary or secondary reader for 2 to 4 applications. And what that means is you actually join the program officer for a 1 hour virtual administrative visit with the applicant for your primary applications. So you'll get a chance to talk to the applicant, ask them questions, get clarifying points on their application. And that's a really cool experience to engage directly with an applicant that you don't get in another program. And then lastly, you participate in a 2-day virtual public panel meeting at the end of the review period in operating support. So that obviously is a little bit more work than the other programs. Advisors in the operating support program report that they spend 45 to 50 hours in total. So that is a great program for someone who maybe has pretty extensive nonprofit work or experience. If you have organizational development experience, you have some experience with grant management or budgets or things like that, that's a really great opportunity. There's just one last thing I want to mention with the operating support program, and that's that we actually have a role called artistic evaluators. And we have artistic evaluators for the operating support program, and those individuals attend or view artistic presentations, preferably in person, but sometimes, virtual performances or recorded performances are all that are available. And then they actually complete a short evaluation form for the event. And then that evaluation is then sent to the panels, which helps the panels assess artistic quality for the applicant. So that's a cool opportunity. And that role is a little bit more flexible and less time intensive. So that makes it a really great opportunity for, maybe somebody who wants to support the arts, but can't necessarily commit to a full panel review. And we'll have information about that as well on the resource page. So I know, again, that I've covered so much ground in a really short period of time. And I know that also advisors are expected to do a lot of work, right? It's a big time commitment. We expect a lot out of our advisors, and that's because we really want this process to be as thorough as possible. Integrity is very important to us, and we want every applicant to get the fairest review possible. But I do want to know, or I do want you to know, I should say, that throughout this whole process of serving as an advisor, you will have a lot of support. So if maybe you're interested in serving, but you're like, whoa, that feels a little bit daunting, you should know that program officers, our support team, are fantastic, and they are available throughout the process to answer any questions, provide resources, or even offer some extra guidance or tips when you need it. We also have a really great criteria and scoring rubric and a very thorough training. So that provides the structure that you will need. Um, like I said, you don't need to have done this work before. We just ask that you come prepared to engage thoughtfully with the materials because we have all the tools that you will need to be successful in this role. If you have any questions about kind of the responsibilities and things like that, um, maybe want some clarification on what the work is, feel free to ask me that in the Q&A section, drop it in the chat, write it down, whatever works. But one thing I want to cover is really why you should serve, why it's important, and why it's valuable. I really truly believe that serving as an advisor is one of the most meaningful ways that you can support the arts in Minnesota. It's also a really cool and unique opportunity to engage civically. It's an opportunity to develop professionally because you're going to read so many applications and you're going to learn a lot about evaluation and communication and grant writing. If you are a grant writer, I think this is a great professional development tool because you'll learn a lot about what works and what doesn't. It's also a really unique way to contribute to more transparent public funding. We are investing public dollars, and so it's important that we have the public guiding us and helping us be good stewards of those resources. And, lastly, if you believe in the value of the arts in your communities or in communities across Minnesota, this is a really, really powerful way to kind of sustain that impact and help make a difference and help, um, you know, keep the arts strong in all of our communities. And then lastly, if you are interested in serving as a grant advisor, um, it's a really easy application process. I think Gabby will drop the link here, but there is a link to an interest form. We ask pretty basic information, your experience, your background, what kind of programs you might be interested in, and it's a quick application process. And then after you apply, I will reach out to you. We'll kind of work together to find the best program for you, and then we'll go from there. I also want to add that I am more than happy to have one-on-one conversations with you. So if you have any questions about serving as an advisor or, what it really entails or would like some more information about the work, please reach out to me. Please feel free to call or email. And I'm happy to have those conversations. We're also going to share some of that contact information on the resource page that I keep referring to. So don't scramble to find it right now. We will provide that information to you after the webinar. All right. I know that I shared a lot of information with you folks here. I think now's a great time to open it up to questions.
Yeah, and Taylor, this is Teresa. I'll just jump in while you
Yeah.
were speaking, and I know there's a lot of things going on. We do have, as folks think about questions, we can do it a couple different ways. You can throw it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we'll unmute you to ask a question. But we do have a couple that are in the chat, so maybe as people are thinking, we can cover those right now if that's
Yeah,
okay.
that sounds great.
One of the questions was when you were talking about funding, there was a question about NEA funding, and
Yes.
um, are you feeling impacts from any cuts in NEA funding as far as the money that comes into the Minnesota State Arts Board?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. Luckily, our funding has not been impacted yet. So that's good news for the Arts Board, right? We do believe that public funding for the arts is important at every level, national, state, regional, and locally within your communities, because public funding helps make the arts more affordable and accessible. We do know that the NEA has canceled grants for some Minnesotan organizations, and we know that that has been felt very, very deeply in the community. And we're really sorry for the loss that those funds have caused. And we do hope that the National Endowments for the Arts continues or so, okay, I should back up a little bit. In the past, Congress has actually generally been pretty supportive and provided pretty strong support for the National Endowments for the Arts. And we do hope that moving forward, it will do so again as it develops its budget for 2026. And if you have kind of more detailed questions about NEA funding and kind of how that's affected the Minnesota arts community, I certainly welcome them, and I can refer you out to some additional information.
Yeah, and Taylor, and I know you covered this, but just to clarify, I had another question. Um, so when we think about the legacy funding,
Mhm.
how long is that good for? I mean, how long is that solid for your
Yeah.
funding?
So that is guaranteed through 2034. After 2034, there would need to be another amendment or some kind of legislative action that extends that funding and guarantees it for the Arts Board.
Great. And then we had another question, and we'll do a follow-up here from Anne Reinerson too, that had wanted to be an advisor, hadn't connected yet. So we'll follow up. Taylor will get that information to her so she can follow up with you
Yeah.
and see if we had a little glitch in the system or something like that. So I'm just looking through other questions. Here's another question that's in the chat from Anna. Do you feel advisors make better applicants having read and understood the process in a more thorough fashion when you think about advisors?
Yeah. That is a great question. Thank you so much. I do. I absolutely do. And in fact, we have had folks who are, kind of one of two things happens. Maybe they are interested in applying for a grant and they just don't quite feel like they're ready. So they think, hey, like, let me serve as an advisor because you're going to get a really deep dive look of exactly how each application is scored and reviewed, which at the end of the day is going to make your application stronger. Another thing that we see happen occasionally is people will serve as an advisor and they're an artist themselves and they think, why aren't I applying for grant funding? And it'll kind of inspire and encourage them to apply for grant funding as well. So, yes, if you are somebody who is interested in applying for grant funding or have in the past, this is a really great way to strengthen applications.
Yeah, and Taylor, that sort of feeds into another question from Beth in the chat. If you're thinking about applying for a state arts grant, should you not consider applying to be an advisor? If it and even if it would be in a different area of Minnesota than where your nonprofit is. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, yep, that's another good question. So the short answer is yes. If you are applying for a grant, you can still serve as an advisor. That said, it is considered a conflict of interest if you are reviewing in a program in which you are also an applicant. Um, and beyond that, it's also considered a conflict of interest if you are reviewing in a program where maybe you work for the applicant, you do some contract work for the applicant, or if you're even a board member of the applicant. If that's the case, if there is a conflict of interest with a certain program, what we would do is we would actually assign you to another program. So we would work with you to see, where your interests are, where your availability is, and have you serve in another program. And that's okay. You're still able to serve in that case as long as it's in a different program.
That's great information. I know I've served on panels where you have to go through and say, do I know, do I have a conflict because I know somebody? So that's great
Mhm.
to think about that. But that applicant piece is really important. Another question in here was a question Are you using AI software at all to review applications?
No, we do
Okay.
not use AI software to review applications. So the way the process works is we'll receive our applications, right? And we'll have our grants managers and our program officers kind of run through those applications preliminarily to determine which are eligible to apply and which are not. So once those applications have been deemed eligible, they then go to for review. And so at no point do we use AI. It is reviewed entirely by people.
I love it. Thank you. Then there's another question from Beth. When applying for a small grant from the State Arts Board, do all of your programs require that a nonprofit pays a small salary to a staff member? We're a small nonprofit and want to grow, but right now we can't afford to pay a staff member part-time unless it's working on a program. And that's a very common thing
Yeah.
for a lot of small nonprofits. So yeah, Taylor, what are your thoughts on that?
No, Beth, I appreciate that question, and I know the struggle working throughout my career with smaller nonprofits. We're all many nonprofits are operating on a shoestring budget. We do require that our nonprofits do have a salaried person. Um, and that is, I know, especially for our operating support program. There may be, and I'm sorry, I don't know the exact guidelines for each program. There may be some programs where that's not necessary. Beth, that's a great question, and I will be sure to follow up with some additional information. But just for everybody interested, right now I'm looking at the Arts Board website, and if you go to our homepage, you will see all of the grant programs listed for this fiscal year, and then it links out to the program guidelines where it will answer that question. I can also connect you with program officers who can give a little bit more detail there. But
That
great
would be,
question.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good question because that is
Mhm.
always a struggle for small nonprofits. So I'll just jump to Anna's next question. As a maker and instructor in my craft area, I'd love to see funds offer classes at the nonprofit we're starting in Lanesboro. Well, this is the Driftless Fiber Arts Collective.
Mhm.
Um, but in what programs could I and other makers qualify to apply, given that some are also founding board members of the collective? Would this break the rules? No one takes a salary at the collective, or I'll just volunteer. So do you have any good intel on that, Taylor?
Yeah, I see the question here. Let me just read it over to make sure I'm understanding it right. Love to seek funds to offer classes at the nonprofit we're starting, but in
Mhm.
what other programs could I or other makers qualify to apply, given that some, okay. Yeah, so that's a good question. I will say that with our grant programs, there's some overlap, right? So, right off the bat, it sounds like if you're offering classes, maybe the arts education program would be a natural fit. But depending on what kind of programming and classes you're doing, it might fit also in some other programs. So, just to preface with that, there's some flexibility there with which programs that you are able to apply to. If I'm understanding the question correctly, you're talking about applying for funding, right, Anna? Not applying as an advisor. So, yeah, yes, for funding. Okay, thanks, Anna. No, that shouldn't be an issue that, your board members or founding members. Again, refer back to those program guidelines. Some of those programs do require that you have a salaried person, um, but I don't think all of them do. But I don't want to speak out of pocket. I'm not a program officer. I'm not as familiar with funding guidelines as our program officers would be. So I just want to add that disclaimer. But Anna, I would be happy to connect you with a program officer to ask those questions.
And that was going to be my follow with you, Taylor, on that is if folks have questions and they're trying to figure out where do I connect
Hmm.
at the state board or how do I connect best with my regional arts council, that's something that you can help navigate for the folks on the
Absolutely.
call today. Because I know sometimes it's like, I don't even know where to go to ask those questions. So I think for you to be able to serve on that, and we'll put Taylor's contact information in the chat. We'll do it in our follow-up too if you have questions for her. But that's the experience I have had is that very helpful organization and trying to help you navigate to figure out how to access resources. So thanks for doing that, Taylor. And then just a quick question. Can you just clarify the difference between a panelist and advisor? Or are they saying similar, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Thank you for that question, because you will probably hear both terms used. And the easiest way to describe it is advisor is kind of like the overarching umbrella, right? So if you're an advisor, you're either serving as a panelist or an artistic evaluator. Um, and so it's most accurate to say advisor because that just covers all bases. You'll sometimes hear me or other people slip into using the word panelist. If you are serving as a grant application reviewer and you're working on a panel team, um, we'll sometimes refer to you as panelists. But that's a great question, Cecilia. And that's a conversation we have within the arts boards too. We kind of use those terms interchangeably sometimes, but they're not, like I said, the most accurate way to describe it as is a program advisor or grant advisor.
Wonderful. And folks can put questions in the chat, or if you want to ask your question too, we'll just unmute you. We knew we had a lot of people today, so when you came on, you were muted. So we're more than happy to unmute too. We have another question in here from Chris. Um, you read, and this is a good, this is more of a comment. Your regional arts councils are looking for board members and panelists. One would start there and then move to the State Arts Board, which is a good point. And I think from 100 Rural Women's perspective, when Taylor and I first talked about doing this webinar, it's like, and I want you to talk to this a bit, Taylor. I've served, I live in a rural area, and I've been on panels, statewide panels, and sometimes it's just me or being a couple of rural people. And what we talked about is how do we get more rural people on panels who better understand small rural communities and smaller nonprofits. So can you speak
Mhm.
to that a little bit, Taylor?
Yeah, yeah, I would love to. And thank you, Christine, for that comment. Um, So it's true. Something we do at the Arts Board is we should have a 50-50 mix of folks from Greater Minnesota and the Metro on each panel. Because each panel is reviewing applications from both the Metro and Greater Minnesota. And we want to be reflective of that. Um, as many of us know, if we're living in Greater Minnesota and especially in rural communities, we kind of have unique challenges or not just challenges, unique opportunities um, that, sometimes organizations or artists from the metro just might not um, have or understand in the way that we do. So it's so important that Greater Minnesota is represented on these panels because we can provide insight that maybe others cannot. And to Christine's point, that is a great starting point. If you are interested in specifically serving your area and your region, working with your regional arts councils to serve as an advisor or a reviewer with them is a great opportunity to kind of be hyper localized for your own community. If you are interested in kind of learning about what's happening across the state or supporting the arts across the state, regardless of region, the Minnesota State Arts Board is a great way to do that. So I know that a lot of our advisors do both. They'll serve as reviewers for regional arts councils and they'll serve as reviewers for the Arts Board. And that's okay. People are allowed to do that. And I think my hat's off to those folks who are dedicated to the arts in that way.
And Taylor, another question that came through to me as far as writing, uh, pursuing a grant. And I think this is always a fear for a smaller arts organization or smaller nonprofit to begin with. But I mean, do you need a professional grant writer? When you think about submitting a grant, do you have any advice on or tips for people as they're working on grants?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, I want to just again that disclaimer, I'm not a program officer and I don't work with applicants. So I don't want to speak out of turn or maybe say something that's not true. But my advice would be to A, make sure that you're reading those guidelines very, very carefully. And as you're planning your application, be in contact with the program officer who is, you know, they're the experts of those programs and they can answer any questions that you might have. Um, they can kind of help you work through maybe some tough points in your application. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Just work closely with program officers as you're preparing your application because making sure that you understand the guidelines is going to be really key in submitting a successful application. Again, another great way to strengthen your grant writing skills is to serve as an advisor because, like I mentioned before, it's just going to give you a lot of insight into which applications are successful and which are not. So that's a great practical way to gain some experience and strengthen your application.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know when I've served on different panels and just to hear comments from different reviewers, it's like, oh, that's interesting. So I agree. I think that helps you figure out how to strengthen any proposals that you would do in the future.
Yeah, even if
Yeah,
it's
go
not
ahead.
arts related, I just want to add
Mhm.
that, any kind of
Right.
grant application that you're submitting, arts or not, I think doing some grant review is a good way to strengthen your own applications.
Yeah, totally agree. And Anna had another question about she's hearing that aesthetic and perhaps more practical aspects of grant applications are very separate concerns for reviewers. Is that right or wrong?
Okay, yes, good question. So if I'm understanding you, Anna, you're asking like the aesthetic or artistic merit of maybe a practice or art form or performance is separate for the review. And to an extent, yes, I would say that that's right. Um, we do want to make sure that we are funding high quality projects, of course. And so that's part of what we look at. But because we are investing public funds, what we are looking at most closely is how is this work engaging with Minnesotans? In what way is this work or this practice, this mural, this performance, how is it engaging people? How is it inviting other Minnesotans to participate in the arts? So that public impact and that community engagement is something that we weigh very heavily.
Yeah, and Taylor, Anna had a follow-up, just right. So are these weighed more heavily, as you just said, depending on the program area too?
Another good question. And again, not a program officer, so I don't want to speak too much to specific program guidelines. Um, but I think that every single program, um, a significant part of that scoring criteria comes down to how is this engaging with people. So I don't know that that artistic or aesthetic merit is kind of weighed differently across programs. I think we're pretty much across the board looking at how is this impacting the public and benefiting the public.
And Taylor, I know that we did an introduction of you, we talked about the state arts fund, but can you talk a little bit more about, I had a question about what's your role? So, I mean, it's wonderful to have you sort of as a conduit in to help navigate, but tell us a little bit more about what you do in your
Mhm.
work.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, I'm the advisor recruitment coordinator. So that's kind of a mouthful of a title, but what I do is recruit advisors across the state to participate in that grant review process. So I do not work really at all in the applicant side of things. I don't, I don't help with applications. I don't see applications until they are submitted and deemed eligible. So really my role is to make sure that we are working with folks all across the state who are qualified and committed to completing panel review. And I'm part of that advisor support team too that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So throughout that process of you serving as an advisor and reviewing grant applications, I'm just kind of one of the several people who you can reach out to ask questions and I'll help you through that process.
And I know you touched on this earlier, but can you talk a little bit about serving on a panel? So, you want folks from a variety of different backgrounds. So tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about that. I mean, you don't, advisors don't need to come in with like full knowledge. So when you think about recruiting, do people feel like they have, is there any kind of qualifications or anything that you look for with panelists?
Yeah. So the what's important, what is, I guess, a qualification or a requirement, is that you be a Minnesota resident. You have to be 18 or older, and you have to have either some kind of experience in the arts world or in the nonprofit world or public sector work. Um, so those are the only like hard requirements. Of course, you need access to internet and a computer to complete the review, so I should add that. Um, but as far as experience goes, like I said, we really do want a broad range of professional, personal experiences at the table. Um, so, maybe you're somebody, I'll use this as an example because it's personal to me. If you are somebody who has maybe been on the board of a chamber of commerce, you're somebody who understands community development and community engagement, right? So that translates very well to being a grant reviewer or grant application reviewer for the Arts Board. Um, because we are looking at how is this applicant engaging with Minnesota communities, people with some kind of connection or experience in community engagement work is really, really helpful. Educators are a great example of people who make great advisors for many reasons. First, they're very organized, they're good at scoring, but they just also have that practical knowledge of teaching and what makes a successful learning opportunity. So yeah, really, really broad experiences people bring to the table, and that's great. I think it's our most successful panels are when we have people all across sectors. We have people who are in the arts world, we have educators, we have nonprofit experience, we have finance experience. The more people we can bring to the table, the better.
So Taylor, when you just mentioned, access to the internet, can you talk a little bit about the process? I think that's another thing for people to serve on grant panels. Can you talk a little bit about how much of it is remote? Is there any time that people have to be together
Yeah.
in person, which can be tough for
Mhm.
rural folks sometimes? Can you visit a little bit about that?
Yeah, happily. I know I glossed over it at a very high level, kind of as I was giving my overview. So the way I explain it to people and the way I think of it is your review period is mostly independent. You will be reading applications on your own, um, and it's kind of bookended by two virtual meetings. First, you're going to have your live virtual training with the program officer, and you do not need to, join that in person. That's virtual. So you do your training, you're prepared, then you get your applications to start reading and scoring and all of that good stuff. And you do that on your own time. And then at the end of your panel service, you will have a live virtual public panel meeting. Um, and that's where you meet with your team of 7 or, maybe a few more people. Your team is about 7 to 10 usually is how many people you'll be working with. But again, that is all virtual. Once COVID happened, like many folks, we kind of transitioned to doing things um, virtually. And the benefit of that is that it makes it a lot easier for folks from Greater Minnesota to participate.
Well, I know we're running down on time here. Does anybody have uh, any other questions that you want to throw in the chat that Taylor can help you with today? There's one from Cecilia. If one served on multiple panels several times, are we still required to go through the training? That's a good question.
It is a good question. So if you have served on panels several times, um, of course, we always recommend that you participate in trainings if possible. Um, occasionally program guidelines will change, and we just want to highlight that in our training. That said, we know that sometimes people are busy, or maybe you've done a panel review a few times. We offer a recorded version of the training when necessary, so you can watch it on your own time. Um, as people who have served as advisors know, we also have some digital training materials, not just the live virtual training that you can refer to. So that was a lot of words, Cecilia, but to answer your question, we are flexible, and we can find kind of the right fit for you depending on the situation.
And then we have another question from Jamie. Would working in higher education count as relevant experience? It feels like a stretch to me, but I used to work with a program at the U of M that supported learning and development of first-year students to community service experiences, identify development and cultivating meaning and purpose. That sounds cool. But yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Jamie, absolutely. The answer is yes. That is absolutely applicable to the kind of work that we do. Any public sector work applies, and higher education, certainly education in general, I think is a great thing to bring to the table. So yes, that would be relevant.
And then Anna's got a question. How many panelists and advisors do you need to cover? Oh my gosh, all the programs in a year's time. Are there areas of the state where you need more people to represent? Or is everything outside the Twin Cities considered rural?
Another great question, Anna. We need a lot of advisors. We need it kind of fluctuates every year depending on how many applications we receive. We sort of project what we think we're going to receive, and sometimes we receive more, sometimes we receive less. But in general, we need over 600 advisors to serve each year. Um, we have, people get busy, and things come up, and they can't always complete panel service, which we understand that happens. So that 600 number that I threw out, that's kind of the bare minimum. We need almost double that in order to make sure that when panel time rolls around, we have enough people to complete the process. So, like about 1,000 people we need each year to serve as panelists or advisors, I should say. And then for the other part of your question, are there areas of the state that you need more people to represent? Greater Minnesota, which is considered anything outside of the Twin Cities metro area. We need more folks from Greater Minnesota. We also need more people of color on our panels. I've said it so many times, I kind of sound like a broken record, but it's so important that we have a variety of perspectives on our panels. And so making sure we have folks from Greater Minnesota, rural areas, people of color, people with disabilities. Those are the kinds of folks that we need more of on our panels.
And I know we're running out of time. We've got a couple more questions here. Is there a specific time of the year this happens, or is it throughout the year?
Great question, Whitney. It happens throughout the year. So we just kind of kicked off our panel season. So operating support and arts education panels, those reviews have just concluded. But we are still recruiting folks for accessible arts, creative individuals, arts experiences, and cultural expressions. And those reviews, depending on the program, will run through November. So if you have questions about kind of when, when programs are happening, that's information that I'm happy to provide.
Okay, and then we'll take one more question and we'll close out. But as you can see, Tiffany has a longer question here, Taylor, just about supporting members in pursuing grants. And she has a for-profit studio. So this is probably something you two can connect on, but she was just saying that she typically has 2 to 3 members either pursuing a grant or utilizing funds. And also individuals want to point them to opportunities. She's assuming this is a conflict.
Mm.
And who would you recommend she chat with to better
Yeah.
understand this?
Yeah, so Tiffany, I'm happy to have a longer conversation with you about it. But you brought up a good point that I kind of didn't mention when I was talking about conflicts of interests. So in a situation like this, a conflict of interest might exist, but that doesn't necessarily make you ineligible to serve in that program. So what we do in the case of, maybe you have just kind of a close personal or professional relationship with somebody or an organization, and you don't think that you could judge that application fairly, we would just have you not review that particular application, but you could still serve in that program, if that makes sense. There's a little bit of gray area there. So if you are working with that applicant as a consultant, in that case, you would have to serve in a different program. So there's lots of kind of gray areas and caveats and things like that. So if you have questions about conflicts of interest, Tiffany, I am happy to have that conversation with you and send you our official conflict of interest policy. That might be helpful.
I love it. Well, we'll do that follow-up, and I know we're running on time here and want to make sure that we're cognizant of everybody's time. And I appreciate that conflict of interest piece, that discussion, because sometimes when you're on a review panel, it's like, oh, I know that person. And you can identify your conflict, but I love what you said, Taylor, that you might just move somebody to a different program to review. So there's a lot of options. So hopefully
Mhm.
that won't inhibit anybody from serving. So I want to thank you today, Taylor, for joining us and sharing this information. I want to thank everybody that came on. If we have a question that we weren't able to get to, we've got a survey that we're sending out that asks you to submit any questions we have missed. We also will double check through the chat. I know we have a couple more coming in right now that we don't have time to answer, but we want to make sure that we end on time. And again, thank you, thank you. Next steps, we will follow up after we get our recording loaded up and all our resources put together. We'll follow up with an email to everyone who registered. And Taylor's contact information will be in there. We'll have a link to our website, which will have the video recording and all of the resources. So we just want to thank you from 100 Rural Women for joining today, and come join one of our programs someday. We'd love to have you with. And as I said, we're all about connecting women and inspiring leadership. And so it was wonderful to see everyone here today, and everyone's welcome. So thanks so much. And we just appreciate this opportunity to lift up amazing women like Taylor. So everybody have a great week, and appreciate your time, and look for more information from us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.